Relations in Tanchico. Elaine fumbled with the two slim red-lacquered sticks, trying to set them properly in her fingers. Sursa, she reminded herself. Not sticks. Sursa. A fool way to eat, whatever they're called. On the other side of the table in the chamber of falling blossoms, Egyanin frowned at her own Sursa, one upright in each hand, as if they really were sticks. Nynaeve held hers nestled in her hand the way Rendra had showed them, but so far she had managed to lift one sliver of meat and a few sliced peppers as far as her mouth. Her eyes were tight with determination. A great many small white bowls covered the table, each filled with slices and tiny slivers of meat and vegetables, some in sauces dark or pale. Elaine thought it might take the rest of the day to finish this meal. She gave the honey-haired innkeeper a grateful smile when the woman leaned over her shoulder to position the sursa properly. "Your land is at war with our Doman," Egyanan said, sounding almost angry. "Why do you serve the dishes of your enemy?" Rendra shrugged, making a moue behind her veil. She wore the palest possible red today, and beads of the same color woven into her narrow braids made soft clicks when she moved her head. "It is the fashion now. 4 days ago the Garden of Silver Breezes began it, and now almost every patron asks for the Damani food. I think maybe it is that if we cannot conquer the Damani, at least we can conquer their food. Maybe in Bandar Eben they eat the lamb with the honey sauce and the glazed apples, yes? In 4 days more, perhaps it is something else. The fashion it changes quickly now, and if someone whips up the mob against this—" She shrugged again. "Do you think there will be more riots?" Elaine asked. "Over what sort of food inns are serving?" "The streets, they are restive," Rendra said, spreading her hands fatalistically. "Who can say what will spark them again? The uproar the day before yesterday, it came from a rumor Maracru had declared for the Dragon Reborn, or maybe fallen to the Dragon Sworn, or the rebels, perhaps. How seems to have made little difference. But does the mob turn on the people from Maracru? No. They rampage through the streets, pulling people from the carriages, and then burn the grand hall of the assembly. Perhaps the word comes that the army it has won a battle or lost one, and the mob rises against those who serve Damani food. Or maybe it burns warehouses on the Calpena docks. Who can say?" "No proper order," Egyanin muttered, thrusting the sursa firmly between the fingers of her right hand. From the expression on her face, they might have been daggers she was going to use to stab what was in the bowls. A bit of meat dropped out of Nynaeve's sursa short of her lips. Growling, she snatched it from her lap, dabbing at the cream-colored silk with her napkin. "Ah, order!" Rendra laughed. "I remember order. Maybe it will come again one day, yes? Some thought the Panarch Amathera would put the Civil Watch back at their duties, but were I she, with the memory of the mob brawling outside my investiture, the Children of the Light, they killed very many of the rioters. Perhaps this means there will not be another riot, but perhaps it means the next riot it will be twice so big, or 10 times. I think that I too would keep the watch and the children close around me, but this is no talk to disturb the meal." Examining the table, she nodded to herself in approval, the beads in her thin plaits clicking. As she turned toward the door, she paused with a small smile. "It is the fashion to eat the Damani food with the sursa, and of course one does what is the fashion, but there are none here to see save yourselves, yes? Should you perhaps wish the spoons and the forks, they are under the napkin." She indicated the tray on the end of the table. "Enjoy!" Nynaeve and Egyanan waited until the door closed behind the innkeeper, then grinned at each other and reached for the tray with decidedly unseemly haste. Elaine still managed to get her spoon and fork first. Neither of the others had ever had to eat in the few minutes between a novice's chores and lessons. "It is tasty enough," Egyanan said after her first mouthful. "When you can put any on your tongue." Nynaeve laughed at her. In the 7 days since meeting the dark-haired woman with her sharp blue eyes and slow drawl, they had both come to like her. She was a refreshing change from Rendra's chatter about hair and clothes and complexions, or stares in the street from people who looked as if they would slit a throat for a copper. This was her fourth visit since that first meeting, and Elaine had enjoyed every one. Egyanin had a directness and an air of independence she admired. The woman might be only a small trader in whatever came her way, but she could challenge Gareth Bryn for saying what she meant and bowing to no one. Still, Elaine wished the visits had not been so frequent, or rather, that she and Genevieve had not been at the Three Plum Court so often for Egyanin to find. Almost constant riots since Amathera's investiture made moving about the city all but impossible, however, despite their coterie of Domon's tough sailors. Even Nynaeve had admitted as much after they had had to flee a shower of fist-sized stones. Tom still promised to find them a carriage and team, but she was not too certain how hard he was looking. He and Julian both seemed insufferably pleased that she and Nynaeve were mired inside the inn. They come back bruised or bleeding and don't want us to even stub a toe, she thought wryly. Why did men always think it was right to keep you safer than they kept themselves? Why did they think their injuries mattered less than yours? From the taste of the meat, she suspected Tom should look in the kitchens here if he wanted to find horses. The thought of eating horse made her stomach queasy. She chose a bowl containing only vegetables, bits of dark mushroom, red peppers, and some sort of feathery green sprouts in a pale, tangy sauce. "What shall we discuss today?" Nynaeve asked Egyanin. "You have asked almost every question I can think of. Nearly every one they knew how to answer, at any rate. If you want to learn any more about Aes Sedai, you'll have to go to the tower as a novice." Egyanin flinched unconsciously, as she did at any words linking the power to her. For a moment she stirred the contents of one of the small bowls, frowning at it. "You have not made any real effort," she said slowly, "to keep secret from me that you are looking for someone. Women. If it does not intrude on your secrets, I would ask—" She cut off at a knock on the door. Baal Domon strode in without waiting, grim satisfaction warring with uneasiness on his round face. "I have found them," he began, then gave a start at the sight of Egyanin. Shockingly, Egyanin knocked over his chair, leaping up, and threw a fist at Domon's thick middle almost too fast to see. Somehow Domon caught her wrist in a big hand, twisted. There was a flurried instant where they seemed to be trying to hook each other's ankle with a foot. Egyanin attempted to strike him in the throat. Then somehow she was face down on the table, Domon's boot on her shoulder, and her arm levered up hard against his knee. Despite that, she snatched her belt knife free. Elaine wove flows of air around the pair before she even knew she had embraced Saidar, freezing them where they were. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded in her best icy tone. "How dare you, Master Domon?" Nynaeve's voice was equally cold. "Unhand her!" More warmly, worriedly, she added, "Egyanin, why did you try to hit him? I told you to release her, Domon." "He cannot, Nynaeve." Elaine did wish the other woman could at least see flows clearly without being angry. She did try to hit him first. "Egyanin, why?" The dark-haired woman lay there with eyes shut and mouth tight. Her knuckles stood out bloodless from her grip on the knife hilt. Domon glared from to Nynaeve, held Ilianer beard nearly bristling. His head was all that Elaine had left free to move. "The woman do be Shanchan," he growled. Elaine exchanged startled looks with Nynaeve. "Egyanin? Shanchan? It was impossible. It must be impossible." "Are you certain?" Nynaeve asked slowly, quietly. She sounded as stunned as Elaine felt. "I will never forget her face," Domon replied firmly. "A ship captain. It did be she who did take me to Falma, me and my ship, captives to the Shanchan." Egyanin made no effort to deny it. only lay there gripping her knife. Shan-chan. But I like her. Carefully, Elaine shifted the weave of flows until Egyanan's knife hand lay uncovered to the wrist. Let go of it, Egyanan, she said, kneeling beside the woman. Please. After a moment, Egyanan's hand fell open. Elaine picked up the knife and backed away, loosing the flows completely. Let her up, Master Domon. She be Shan-chan, mistress, he protested, and hard as iron steel. Let her up. Muttering under his breath, he released Egyanan's wrist, moving away from her quickly as if he expected she might come at him again. The dark-haired woman, the Shan-chan woman, merely stood, though. She worked the shoulder he had wrenched, eyeing him thoughtfully, glanced at the door, then raised her head and waited with every outward appearance of calm. It was hard not to keep on admiring her. Shan-chan, Nynaeve growled. She clutched a fistful of her long braids, then gave her hand an odd stare and let go. But her brows were still furrowed and her eyes hard. Shan-chan, worming your way into our friendship. I thought you had all gone back where you came from. Why are you here, Egyanan? Was our meeting really an accident? Why did you seek us out? Did you mean to lure us somewhere your filthy Suldam could lock their leashes around our throats? Egyanan's blue eyes widened fractionally. Oh yes, Nynaeve told her sharply. We know about you, Shan-chan, and your Suldam and Damani. We know more than you. You chain women who channel, but those you use to control them can channel too, Egyanan. For every woman who can channel that you've leashed like an animal, you walk by another 10 or 20 every day without realizing it. I know, Egyanan said simply, and Nynaeve's mouth fell open. Elaine thought her own eyes were going to pop out of her head. You know? She took a breath and went on in something less like an incredulous squeal. Egyanan, I think you are lying. I've not met many Shan-chan before, and never for more than a few minutes, but I know someone who has. Shan-chan don't even hate women who channel. They think they are animals. You'd not take it so easily if you knew or even believed. Women who can wear the bracelet are women who can learn to channel, Egyanan said. I did not know it could be learned. I was taught a woman either could or could not. But when you told me that girls must be guided if they are not born with it, I reasoned it out. May I sit down? So cool. Elaine nodded, and Domon set Egyanan's chair upright, standing behind it while she sat. Looking over her shoulder at him, the dark-haired woman said, You were not so difficult an opponent the last time we met. You did have 20 armored soldiers on my deck then, and a Damani ready to break my ship apart with the power. Just because I can hook a shark from a boat, I do no offer to wrestle it in the water. Surprisingly, he grinned at her, rubbing his side where she must have gotten in a blow Elaine had not seen. You are no so easy an opponent yourself as I did think you would be without your armor and sword. The woman's whole world had to have been turned upside down by her own reasoning, but she was taking it matter-of-factly. Elaine could not imagine what would spin her own world topsy-turvy that way, but she hoped that if she ever found out, she could face it with Egyanan's calm reserve. I have to stop liking her. She is Shan-chan. They'd have collared me for a pet if they could. Liked. How do you stop liking someone? Nynaeve appeared to be having no such difficulty. Planting her fists on the table, she leaned toward Egyanan so fiercely her braids dangled among the small bowls. Why are you here in Tanchico? I thought you had all fled after Falma. And why have you tried to wriggle your way into our trust like some egg-eating snake? If you think you can collar us, think again. That was never my intention, Egyanan said stiffly. All I ever wanted from you was to learn about Aes Sedai. For the first time she seemed hesitant, unsure of herself. Compressing her lips, she looked from Nynaeve to Elaine and shook her head. You are not as I was taught. The light be upon me, I like you. You like us. Nynaeve made it sound a crime. That answers none of my questions. Egyanin hesitated again, then held her head up, defying them to do their worst. Suldam were left behind at Fam. Some deserted after the disaster. A few of us were sent to bring them back. I only found one, but I discovered that an Idam would hold her. Seeing Nynaeve's fists tighten, she quickly added, I let her go last night. I will pay dearly if that is ever discovered, but after talking with you, I could not. Grimacing, she shook her head. That is why I stayed with you after Elaine revealed herself. I knew Bethaman was a Suldam. To discover the Idam held her, that she could. I had to know, to understand about women who could channel. She took a deep breath. What do you mean to do with me? Her hands, folded on the table, did not tremble. Nynaeve opened her mouth angrily and closed it again slowly. Elaine knew her difficulty. Nynaeve might hate Egyanin now. What were they to do with her? It was not clear she had committed any crime in Tanchico, and in any event the Civil Watch seemed interested in nothing beyond saving its own collective skin. She was Shanchan, she had used Suldam and Damani, but on the other hand she claimed to have let this Bethaman go free. For what crime could they punish her? Asking questions they had answered freely? Making them like her? I'd like to stripe your hide till you glow like a sunset, Nynaeve growled. Abruptly, her head swung toward Domon. You found them? You said you found them. Where? He shifted his feet, shooting a meaning look at the back of Egyanin's head, eyebrows rising in a question. I do not believe she is a dark friend, Elaine said when Nynaeve hesitated. I certainly am not. Egyanin's stare was fierce-eyed and offended. Folding her arms as if to keep from tugging her braids, Nynaeve glared at the woman, then shifted an accusatory frown to Domon, as though this entire mess were his fault. There isn't anywhere to lock her, she said finally, and Rendra would surely demand reasons. Go ahead, Master Domon. He gave a last doubtful look at Egyanin. At the Panarch's palace, one of my men did see two of the women on your list, the one with the cats and the Saldaean woman. Are you certain? Nynaeve said. At the Panarch's palace? I wish you had seen for yourself. More women than Marilyn Gamalfin like cats, and Asni Zaramini is not the only woman from Saldaea, even in Tanchico. A narrow-faced, blue-eyed woman with a wide nose feeding a dozen cats in this city where people do eat cats, in the company of another with that Saldaean nose and tilted eyes. That is no so common a pair, Mistress Almira. It is not, she agreed. But the Panarch's palace? Master Domon, in case you have forgotten, 500 white cloaks guard that palace, commanded by an inquisitor of the Hand of the Light. Jakim Karadin and his officers at least must know Aes Sedai on sight. Would they remain if they saw the Panarch sheltering Aes Sedai? He opened his mouth, but Nynaeve's point was telling, and nothing came out. Master Domon, Elaine said, what was one of your men doing at the Panarch's palace? He tugged at his beard in an embarrassed way and rubbed his bare upper lip with a wide finger. You see, the Panarch Amathera do be known to like ice peppers, the white kind that be very hot, and whether or no she be amenable to gifts herself, the customs men will know who did give her one and be more amenable themselves. Gifts, Elaine said in her best reproving voice.
Hey, OG, how you
You
doing?
were more honest on the docks and called them bribes. Surprisingly, Egyanin had twisted
How's
around
your
in her
evening
chair to
going?
give him a disapproving look, too. Fortune prick me, he muttered. You did no ask me to give up my trade. And I would know if you did bring my aged mother to ask. A man do have a right to his trade. Egyanin snorted and righted herself. His bribes are not our problem, Elaine. Nynaeve sounded
Oh,
exasperated.
no
I
stars?
don't care if he bribes the
Oh,
entire
that
city
always
and smuggles.
sucks.
A rap at the door cut her off. With a cautioning look at the others, she snapped, "You sit quiet," to Egyanin and raised her voice. "Come." Julian stuck his head into the room with that silly cylindrical cap on, frowning as usual at Domon. The gash on his dark cheek, the blood already dried, was not unusual either. The streets were rougher now by daylight than they had been by dark in the beginning. "May I speak to you alone, Mistress Almira?" he said, when he saw Egyanin sitting at the table. "Oh, come in," Nynaeve told him sharply. "After what she's heard already, it won't matter if she hears a little more. Have you found them in the Panarch's palace too?" In the act of shutting the door, he shot an unreadable, tight-mouthed glance at Domon. The smuggler smiled, showing too many teeth. For a moment, they might come to blows. "So the Ileana is ahead of me," Julian muttered ruefully. Ignoring Domon, he addressed Nynaeve. "I told you the woman with the white stripe would lead me to them. That is a very distinctive thing. And I saw the Damani woman there, too. From a distance, I am not fool enough to wade into a school of Silverpike, but I cannot believe there is another Damani woman besides Gianna Kaida in all of Tarabon." "You mean they are in the Panarch's palace?" Nynaeve exclaimed. Julian's face did not change, but his dark eyes widened slightly, flickered toward Domon. "So, he had no proof," he murmured in a satisfied tone. "I did have proof." Domon avoided looking at the tyrant. "If you did no accept it before this fisherman did come, Mistress Almira, it be no fault of mine." Julian drew himself up, but Elaine cut in before the thief catcher could speak.
Excuse me.
"You both found them, and you both brought proof. Very likely neither would have been sufficient without the other. Now we know where they are because of you both. If anything, they looked more disgruntled than before. Men could be absolutely silly at times." "The Panarch's palace." Nynaeve jerked a fistful of braids, then flung the long plaits over her shoulder with a toss of her head. "What they are after must be there. But if they have it, why are they still in Tanchico? The palace is huge. Maybe they haven't found it yet. Not that that helps if we are out here while they are inside." Tom, as usual, entered without knocking, taking in everyone at one glance. "Mistress Young," with an elegant bow, his lips "Nynaeve, with you alone, I haven't been." The fresh bruise on his leathery cheek made Elaine even angrier than the new tear in his good brown cloak. The man was too old to be braving the streets of Tanchico, or any rough streets for that matter. It was time she arranged a pension for him, and somewhere safe and comfortable to live. No more Gleeman wanderings from village to village for him. She would see to it. Nynaeve gave Tom a sharp look. "I've no time for that now. The Black Sisters are in the Panarch's palace, and for all I know, Amathera is helping them search it from cellar to attic." "I found out less than an hour ago," he said disbelievingly. "How did you—" He looked at Domon and Julian, both still glowering like boys who had each wanted the whole cake. It was obvious that he dismissed either as Nynaeve's source of information. Elaine felt like grinning. He did so pride himself on knowing all the undercurrents, all the hidden doings. "The tower has its ways, Tom," she told him, cool and mysterious. "It is best not to inquire too closely into the methods of Aes Sedai." He frowned, bushy white eyebrows drawing down uncertainly. Most satisfactory. She became aware of Julian and Domon frowning at her too, and suddenly it was all she could do not to blush. If they talked, she would look a fool. They would eventually. Men did. Best to bury it quickly and hope. "Tom, have you heard anything that might indicate whether Amathera is a dark friend?" "Nothing." He tugged one long mustache irritably. "Apparently she has not seen Andric since donning the crown of the tree. Maybe the troubles in the streets make travel between the king's palace and the Panarch's too dangerous. Maybe she has simply realized that her power equals his now, and is no longer as compliant as before. Nothing to say what her allegiances are." With a glance at the dark-haired woman in the chair, he added, "I am grateful for the aid Mistress Egyanin gave you with those robbers, but to now I had thought she was a casually met friend. May I ask who she is to be brought into this? I seem to recall you threatening to tie a knot in any careless tongues." "She's a Shan-Chan," Nynaeve told him. "Close your mouth before you swallow a moth, Tom, and sit down. We can eat while we try to figure out what to do." "In front of her?" Tom said. "Shan-Chan?" He had heard some of the story of Falma from Elaine, some of it, and he had certainly heard the rumors here. He studied Egyanin as if wondering where she hid her horns. Julian seemed to be strangling, if his bulging eyes were any indication. He must have heard the Tanchikan rumors, too. "Do you suggest I ask Rendra to lock her in the storeroom?" Nynaeve asked calmly. "That would cause comment, wouldn't it? I'm fairly certain 3 big, hairy men can protect Elaine and me if she pulls a Shan-Chan army out of her pouch. Sit, Tom, or else eat standing up, but stop staring. All of you, sit. I mean to eat before it grows cold." They did, Tom looking as ill-contented as Julian and Domon. Sometimes Nynaeve's bullying manner did seem to work. Perhaps Rand would respond to occasional bullying. Putting Rand out of her mind, Elaine decided it was time to add something of worth. "I cannot see how the Black Sisters can be in the Panarch's palace without Amathera's knowledge," she said, pulling her chair under her. "As I see it, that makes for 3 possibilities. 1, Amathera is a dark friend. 2, she thinks they are Aes Sedai. And 3, she is their prisoner." For some reason, Tom's approving nod made her feel warm. Silly. Even if he did know the game of houses, he was just a foolish bard who had thrown it all away to become a gleeman. "In any case, she will help them look for what they seek. But it seems to me that if she thinks they are Aes Sedai, we might be able to gain her help with the truth. And if she is a prisoner, we could gain it by freeing her. Even Leandrin and her companions could not hold on to the palace if the Panarch ordered it cleared, and that would give us a free hand to search. The problem is discovering whether she is ally, dupe, or captive," Tom said, gesturing with his pair of Sursa. He knew how to use the things perfectly. Julian shook his head. "The real problem is to reach her, whatever her situation. J. Kim Tarek and 500 white cloaks around the palace like the Panarch's legion, and the Civil Watch almost. Few of the ring forts are held half so well. We are not going to fight them," Nynaeve said. "Stop thinking with your head on your chest. This is a time for wits, not muscle. As I see it." The discussion went on through the meal, continuing after the last small bowl was emptied. Egyanin even offered a few cogent comments after a while spent silently, not eating and not seeming to listen. She had a sharp mind, and Tom readily accepted any of her suggestions he agreed with, though he stubbornly rejected out of hand those he did not, just the way he treated everyone else. Even Domon, rather surprisingly, supported Egyanin when he wanted her to keep quiet. "It do make sense, Mistress Almira. Only a fool do reject sense, wherever it do come from." Unfortunately, knowing where the Black Sisters were did little good without knowing whether or not Amathera was with them. That, or what they were after. In the end, almost 2 hours of discussion came to not much more than that, and a few suggestions as to how to find out about Amathera, all of which, it seemed, were to be used by the men, with their spider web of contacts crisscrossing Tanchico. None of the fool men wanted to leave them alone with one of the Shan-Chan, until Nynaeve became angry enough to wrap them all 3 in flows of air while they dithered before the door. "Do you not think," she said icily, surrounded by the glow of Saidar, "that one of us might be able to do the same to her if she says boo?" She would not release any of them until they all nodded their heads, the only bits they could move. "You keep a taut crew," Egyanin said, as soon as the door closed behind them. Be quiet, Shanshan. Nynaeve folded her arms tightly. She seemed to have given up trying to pull at those braids when she was angry. Sit down and be quiet. It was frustrating waiting there, staring at the plum trees and falling blossoms painted on the windowless walls, pacing the floor or watching Nynaeve pace, while Tom and Julian and Domon were out actually doing something. Yet it was worse when each man came back at intervals to report another trail faded, another thread snapped, hear what the others had learned, and hurry out again. The first time Tom returned, with a second purple bruise on the other cheek, Elaine said, "Wouldn't you do better here, Tom, where you could hear whatever Julian and Master Domon report? You could evaluate much better than Nynaeve or I." He shook his foolish, shaggy white head while Nynaeve sniffed loudly enough to be heard in the hallway. "I believe to a house on the Verana, where Amathea supposedly went sneaking some nights before she was raised Panarch. And he was gone before she could say another word. When he next returned, limping distinctly more, reporting that the house was the home of Amathera's old nurse, Elaine spoke in her firmest voice. "Tom, I want you to sit down. You will stay here. I will not have you getting yourself hurt." "Hurt?" he said. "Child, I have never felt better in my life. Tell Julian and Bale there is supposedly a woman named Sarindra somewhere in this city who claims to know all sorts of dark secrets about Amathera." And off he hobbled, cloak swirling behind him. He had another tear in that, too. Stubborn, foolish old man. Once a clamor penetrated the thick walls, brutal shouts and cries from the street. Rendra bustled into the room just when Elaine had decided to go down and see for herself what it was. "Some little trouble outside. Do not disturb yourself. Baal Domon's men, they keep it away from us. Yes, I did not want you to worry." "A riot here?" Nynaeve said sharply. The immediate neighborhood of the inn had been one of the few calm areas in the city. "Not to worry," Rendra said soothingly. "Perhaps they want food. I will tell them where Baal Domon's soup kitchen is, and they will go away." The noise did die down after a while, and Rendra sent up some wine. Not until the serving man was leaving with a sulky look on his face did Elaine realize it was the young man with the beautiful brown eyes. The man had begun reacting to her coldest stares as if they were smiles. Did the fool think she had time to notice him now? Waiting and pacing, pacing and waiting. Sarindra turned out to be a tirewoman dismissed for theft. Not at all grateful for not being imprisoned, she would make any accusation against Amathera that was suggested to her. A fellow who claimed to have proof that Amathera was Aes Sedai and Black Adja also claimed that the same documents proved King Andrik, the Dragon Reborn. The group of women whom Amathera used to meet in secrets were friends Andrik despised, and the shocking discovery that she financed several smuggling craft led nowhere. Almost every noble but the king himself had a finger in smuggling. Every trail ended that way. The worst Tom could discover was that Amathera had convinced two handsome young lords that each was the true love of her life, and Andrik only a means to an end. On the other hand, she had given audiences in the Panarch's palace to various lords, both alone and in company with various women recognizable as Leandrin and others on the list, and reportedly asked and accepted their advice for her decisions. Ally or captive? When Julian came back a good 3 hours after sunset, spinning a thumb-thick staff of ridged wood and muttering about some pale-haired fellow who had tried to rob him, Tom and Domon were already slumped disconsolately at the table with Egyanin. "This will be Falma again," Domon growled at the air. The stout cudgel he had acquired somewhere lay in front of him, and he wore a short sword at his belt now. "Aes Sedai, the Black Adja, meddling with the Panarch. If we do no find something tomorrow, I do mean to take myself out of Tanchito. The next day for certain, if my own sister do ask me to stay." "Tomorrow," Tom said wearily, elbows on the table and chin on fists. I am too tired to think straight any longer. I found myself listening to a laundryman from the Panarch's palace who claims he has heard Amathera singing bawdy songs, the sort you hear in the roughest taverns on the docks. I actually listened to him. For me, Julian said, reversing a chair to straddle it, I mean to look on tonight. I found a roofman who says the woman he keeps company with was another of Amathera's tirewomen. According to him, Amathera discharged all of her tirewomen without pay the same evening she was invested Panna. He will take me to talk with her after he finishes some business of his own at a merchant's house. Nynaeve moved to the end of the table, fists on hips. You will not be going anywhere tonight, Julian. The three of you will be taking turns guarding our door. The men protested volubly, of course, all together. I do have my own trade to keep up, and if I must spend my days asking questions for you... Mistress Elmira, this woman is the first person I have found who's actually seen Amathera since she was raised. Nynaeve, I'll hardly be able to find a rumor tomorrow, much less trace it, if I spend the night playing at... She let them argue themselves out. When they began to trail off, obviously thinking her convinced, she said, Since we have nowhere else to keep the Shan-Chan woman, she will have to sleep with us. Elaine, will you ask Rendra to have a pallet made up? On the floor will do nicely. Egyanin glanced at her, but said nothing. The men were neatly boxed. Either they refused flatly and openly broke their word to do as Nynaeve said, or else argued on, sounding as if they were whining. They glowered and spluttered, and acquiesced. Rendra was clearly surprised they requested only a pallet, but accepted the tale that Egyanin feared to risk the streets at night. She did look miffed when Tom seated himself in the hall beside their door. Those fellows, they did not get inside, however hard they tried. I told you the soup kitchen would take them away, yes? Guests at the Three-Plum Court have no need for the bodyguards on their rooms. I am sure not, Elaine told her, gently trying to push her out with the door. It's just that Tom and the others do worry so. You know how men are. Tom shot her a hawkish stare beneath those thick white eyebrows, but Rendra sniffed, agreeing that she did indeed know, and let Elaine shut the door. Nynaeve immediately turned to Egyanin, who was spreading her pallet on the far side of the bed. Take off your clothes, Shan-Chan. I want to be sure you don't have another knife hidden away. Egyanin calmly stood and undressed down to her linen shift. Nynaeve searched through her dress thoroughly, then insisted on searching Egyanin as well, and none too gently. Finding nothing did not seem to soothe her. Hands behind your back, Shan-Chan. Elaine, bind her. Nynaeve, I don't think she'd bind her with the power, Elaine, Nynaeve said roughly, or I'll cut strips from her dress and bind her hands and heels. You remember how she handled those fellows in the street? Probably her own hirelings. She could probably kill us in our sleep with her bare hands. Really, Nynaeve, with Tom outside? She's Shan-Chan. Shan-Chan, Elaine. She sounded as if she hated the dark-haired woman for a personal wrong, which made no sense. Egwene had been in their hands, but not Nynaeve. The set of her jaw said she meant to have her way, with the power or with ropes if she could find them. Egyanin had already placed her wrists together in the small of her back, compliant, if not meek. Elaine wove a flow of air around them and tied it off. At least it would be more comfortable than bindings cut out of her dress. Egyanin flexed her arms slightly, testing the bonds she could not see, and shivered. She could as easily have broken steel chains. Shrugging, she laid herself down awkwardly on the pallet and turned her back to them. Nynaeve began undoing her own dress. Let me have the ring, Elaine. Are you sure, Nynaeve? She looked at Egyanin in a significant manner. The woman seemed to be paying no attention to them. She'll not go running to betray us tonight. Pausing to pull the dress over her head, Nynaeve sat on the edge of the bed in her thin silk tarabonner shift to roll down her stockings. Tonight is the agreed night. Egwene will expect one of us, and it is my turn. She will be worried if neither of us appears. Elaine fished the leather cord around her neck out of the bosom of her dress. The stone ring, all flecks and stripes in blue and brown and red, lay snuggled against the golden serpent eating its own tail. Unknotting the string long enough to hand the ter'angreal to Nynaeve, she retied and replaced it. Nynaeve strung the stone ter'angreal with her own great serpent ring and Lan's heavy gold ring, let them hang between her breasts. "Give me an hour after you are certain I'm asleep," she said, stretching out atop the blue coverlet. "It should take no longer than that. And keep an eye on her." "What can she do, bound, Nynaeve?" Elaine hesitated before adding, "I don't think she would try to harm us if she were loose." "Don't you dare!" Nynaeve raised her head to glare at Egyanen's back, then lay back on the pillows again. "An hour, Elaine." Closing her eyes, she wriggled to make herself more comfortable. "That should be more than enough," she murmured. Hiding a yawn behind her hand, Elaine brought the low stool to the foot of the bed, where she could watch Nynaeve, and Egyanen too, though that hardly seemed necessary. The woman lay huddled on her pallet with her knees up, hands securely fastened. It had been a strangely tiring day, considering that they had never left the inn. Nynaeve was already muttering softly in her sleep, with her elbows jutting out. Egyanen lifted her head and looked over her shoulder. "She hates me, I think." "Go to sleep." Elaine stifled another yawn. "You do not." "Don't be too sure of yourself," she said firmly. "You are taking this very calmly. How can you be so calm?" "Calm?" The other woman's hands moved involuntarily, twisting at her air-woven bonds. "I am so terrified I could weep." She did not sound it, yet it sounded the simple truth. "We won't harm you, Egyanen." Whatever Nynaeve wanted, she would see to that. "Go to sleep." After a moment, Egyanen's head lowered. An hour. It was right not to worry Egwene needlessly, but she wished that hour could be spent on their problem instead of wandering uselessly in Tel Run Riad. If they could not find out whether Amathera was prisoner or captive, set that aside. I won't puzzle it out here.
One
Once they
second.
did find out, how could they get inside the palace with all those soldiers about, and the civil watch, not to mention Leandrin and the others? Nynaeve had started snoring softly, a habit she denied even more heatedly than she did flinging her elbows about. Egyanen appeared to be taking the long, slow breaths of deep sleep. Yawning into the back of her hand, Elaine shifted on the hard wooden seat and began planning how to sneak into the Panarch's palace. Chapter 52. Need. For a moment Nynaeve stood in the heart of the stone, not seeing it, not thinking of Tel Run at all. Egyanen was Shan-Shan, one of those vile people who had put a collar on Egwene's neck and tried to put one on hers. Knowing it still made her feel hollow. Shan-Shan, and she had snaked her way into Nynaeve's affections. True friends had seemed so few and far between since leaving Emmonsfield. To find a new one, then lose her in this way. "I hate her for that, worst of all," she growled, folding her arms tightly. "She made me like her, and I cannot stop, and I hate her for it." Said aloud, it made no sense at all. "I do not have to make sense." She laughed quietly with a rueful shake of her head. "I am supposed to be Aes Sedai, but not to be wool-gathering like a fool girl." Kalendor sparkled, the crystal sword rising out of the floor stones beneath the great dome, and the massive red stone columns ran off in shadowed rows through that odd dim light that came from everywhere. Easy to remember the feel of being watched, to imagine it again. If it had been imagination before, if it was now, anything might be hiding back in there. A good stout stick appeared in her hands as she peered among the columns. Where was Egwene? Just like the girl to keep her waiting. All that murkiness. For all she knew, something could be about to jump out at. That is an odd dress, Nynaeve. Just stifling a yelp, she spun around heavily, rattling metallically, heart thumping in her throat. Egwene stood on the other side of Callandor with two women in bulky skirts and dark shawls over white blouses, snowy hair held by folded scarves falling to their waists. Nynaeve swallowed, hoping none of them noticed, tried to make herself breathe normally again, sneaking up on her that way. One of the Aiel women she knew from Elaine's description. Amis's face was much too young for such hair, but apparently it had been almost silver even as a child. The other, thin and bony, had pale blue eyes and a leathery wrinkled face. That must be Bear. The tougher of the two, in Nynaeve's opinion, now that she saw them. Not that this Amis looked very odd dress. I rattled. Staring down at herself, she gasped. Her dress looked vaguely like a Two Rivers garment, if Two Rivers women wore dresses fashioned from steel mail, with pieces of plate armor like those she had seen in Shinar. How did men run about and jump into saddles in these things? It dragged at her shoulders and weighed 100 pounds. The good stick was metal now, and spiked at the end like a shiny steel sand burr. Without touching her head, she knew she had on some sort of helmet. Blushing furiously, she concentrated, changed it all to good Two Rivers woolens and a walking staff. It felt good to have her hair back in one proper braid, hanging over her shoulder. Uncontrolled thoughts are troublesome when you walk the dream, Bear said in a thin, strong voice. You must learn to control them if you mean to continue. I can control my thoughts very well, thank you, Nynaeve said crisply. I. Bear's voice was not all that was thin. The two wise ones seemed misty almost, and Egwene in a pale blue riding dress was very nearly transparent. What's the matter with you? Why do you look that way? You try entering Tel'Iran Riyadh while half asleep in a saddle, Egwene said dryly. She seemed to flicker. It is morning in the Threefold Land, and we are on the move. I had to talk Amis into letting me come at all, but I was afraid he would be worried. It is a difficult enough task without the horse, Amis said, sleeping shallowly when you wish to be awake. Egwene has not learned it entirely yet. I will, Egwene said with an irritated determination. She was always too hasty and stubborn in her desire to learn. If these wise ones did not hold on to the scruff of her neck, she would very likely jump into all sorts of trouble. Nancy stopped worrying
Hey,
about
Sports Talk, how you
trouble
doing?
as the younger woman began to speak of trollops and drug car attacking Cold Rock's hold. Siana, a wise one dreamwalker among the dead, ran, hurrying the Tardad Aiel toward this Alcair Dal, apparently in violation of all custom, sending out runners to bring more septs. The boy was confiding his intentions to no
Yeah, it
one.
has been a
The
while.
Aiel were jumpy, and Moiraine was ready to bite the heads off nails. Moiraine's frustration would have been some relief. She had hoped he could escape that woman's influence somehow, if Egwene had not frowned so worriedly. I don't know whether it is madness or design, Egwene finished. I could almost bear it either way if I knew. Nynaeve, I'll admit it isn't prophecy or Tarman Gaiden that makes me
Nice.
anxious right now.
Well, be safe on
Maybe
your
it is
trip,
foolish,
Sports Talk.
but I promised Elaine to look after him, and I do not know how. Nynaeve walked around the crystal sword to put an arm around her. At least she felt solid, even if she did look a reflection in a foggy mirror. Rand's sanity. There was nothing she could do about that. No comfort she could offer. Egwene was the one there to see him. The best you can do for Elaine is to tell him to read what she wrote. She worries about it sometimes. She won't talk, but I think she's afraid she said more than she should have. If he believes she is totally besotted, he's more likely to feel the same, which will not hurt her in the least. At least we have some good news in
Oh, shit.
Tanchica.
Oh, you going
Some.
up for a game?
When she explained it,
Nice.
though, it barely seemed to justify some.
Have fun and be safe.
So you still don't know what it is they're after, Egwene said after she finished. But even if you did, they are on top of it and still might find it first. Not if I can help it. Nynaeve fixed the two wise ones with a firm, level look. From what Elaine said of Amis's reluctance to give anything but warnings, She would need firmness to deal with them. The pair was so hazy a strong puff might blow them away like fog. Elaine thinks you know all sorts of tricks with dreams. Is there any way I could get into Almathera's dreams to see if she is a dark friend? Foolish girl. Bear's long hair swung as she shook her head. If I said I, a foolish girl still. To step into another's dreams is very dangerous unless she knows you and expects you. It is her
No
dream,
shit.
not as
Nice.
here. There, this Amathera will control all, even you. She had been sure that was the way. It was irritating to learn differently. And, foolish girl? I'm not a girl, she snapped. She wanted to yank her braid, but clenched a fist at her side instead. For some reason, pulling at her hair felt strangely uncomfortable of late. I was wisdom of Emmons Field before I became Aes Sedai. She hardly stumbled over the lie at all now. And I
Nice.
told women as old as you when to sit down and be quiet. If you know how to help me, say so instead of giving me foolish maunderings about what is dangerous. I know danger when I see it. Abruptly she realized her single braid had split in two, one over each ear, red ribbons woven through to make tassels on the ends. Her skirt was so short it showed her knees. She wore a loose white blouse like the wise ones, and her shoes and stockings were gone.
Oh,
Where'd
there's
the
gonna be a
gift
lot of
come
drunk
from?
people at any sports
She'd
event.
surely never thought of wearing anything like it. Egwene put a
No
hasty
matter
hand over her mouth.
what
Was she a
sports you go
gas?
to, there's gonna be
Surely
drunk
not
people.
smiling. Uncontrolled thoughts, Amis said, can be very troublesome indeed, Nynaeve Sedai, until you learn. Despite her bland tone, her lips quirked in barely masked amusement. Nynaeve kept her face smooth with an effort. They could not have had anything to do with it. They can't have. She struggled to change back, and it was a struggle, as though something held her as she was. Her cheeks grew hotter and hotter. Suddenly, just at the point when she was ready to break down and ask advice or even help, her clothes and hair were as they had been. She wiggled her toes gratefully in good stout shoes. It had just been some odd stray
Well,
thought.
my brother's
In
doing
any
good.
case, she was not about to voice any suspicions. They looked far too amused as it was, even Egwene. I am not here for some fool contest. I just won't dignify them. If I cannot enter her dream, can I bring her into the world of dreams? I need some way to talk to her. We would not teach you that if we knew how,
That's not
Amis
exactly his
said,
name, but
hitching her shawl angrily. It is an evil thing, you ask, Nynaeve said I.
nice.
She would be as helpless here as you in her dream.
Me and my
Bear's
brother
thin
had
voice
some
sounded like
Spanish
an iron
rice and
rod.
some
It has been
red
handed
chili
down among
enchiladas.
dreamwalkers since the first that no one must ever
Give me
be
one
brought
second, I'll be
into the
right back.
dream. It is said that that was the way of the shadow in the last days of the Age of Legends. Nynaeve shifted her feet under those hard stairs. Realizing she had an arm around Egwene, she held still. She was not about to let Egwene think they had made her uneasy. Not that they had. If she thought of being hauled before the women's circle before she was chosen wisdom, it was nothing at all to do with the wise ones. Firmness was what was. They stared at her. Hazy or not, these women could duel Swan Sanche stare for stare, especially Bear. Not that they intimidated her, but she could see the point of being reasonable. Elaine and I need help. The Black Ajah is sitting on top of something that can harm Rand. If they find it before we do, they may be able to control him. We need to find it first. If there is anything you can do to help, anything you can tell me, anything at all. Aes Sedai, Amis said. You can make a request for help sound a demand. Nynaeve's mouth tightened. Demand? She had all but begged. Demand, indeed? But the Aiel woman did not seem to notice, or chose to ignore it. Yet a danger to Rand al'Thor. We cannot allow the shadow to have that. There is a way. Dangerous? Bear shook her head vigorously. This young woman knows less than Egwene did when she came to us. It is too dangerous for her. Then maybe I could, Egwene began, and the two cut her off as one. You are going to complete your training. You are too eager to go beyond what you know, Bear said sharply. At the same time, Amis said, the slightest bit softer, you are not there in Tanchico. You do not know the place, and you cannot have Nynaeve's need. She is the hunter. Under those iron eyes, Egwene subsided sulkily, and the two wise ones looked at each other. Finally, Bear shrugged and lifted her shawl up around her face. Clearly, she washed her hands of the entire matter. It is dangerous, Amis said. They made it sound as if breathing was dangerous in Tel Riyadh. I Nynaeve cut off as Amis's eyes actually grew harder. She would not have thought it possible. Keeping a firm image of her clothes as they were, of course they had had nothing to do with that. It simply seemed wise to make sure her dress remained as it was. She changed what she had been going to say. I will be careful. It is not possible, Amis told her flatly. But I do not know another way. Need is the key. When there are too many people for the hold, the sept must divide, and the need is for water at the new hold. If no location with water is known, one of us may be called to find one. The key then is the need for a proper valley or canyon not too far from the first with water. Concentrating on that need will bring you nearer to what you want. Concentrating on the need again will bring you closer. Each step brings you nearer, until at last you are not only in the valley, but standing beside where water is to be found. It may be harder for you because you do not know exactly what you are seeking, though the depth of need may make up for it, and you know already in a rough fashion where it lies in this palace. The danger is this, and you must be aware of it. The wise one leaned toward her intently, driving her words home with a tone as sharp as her gaze. Each step is made blind, with eyes closed. You cannot know where you will be when you open your eyes. And finding the water does no good if you are standing in a den of vipers. The fangs of a mountain king kill as quickly in the dream as waking. I think these women the king speaks of will kill more quickly than the snake. I did that, Egwene exclaimed. Nynaeve felt her jump as the Aiel women's eyes went to her. Before I met you, she said hastily. Before we went to Tyr. Need. Nynaeve felt warmer toward the Aiel women now that one of them had given her something she could use. You must keep a close eye on Egwene, she told them, hugging the younger woman to show she meant it fondly. You are right, Bear. She will try to do more than she knows how. She has always been that way. For some reason, Bear arched a white eyebrow at her. I do not find her so, Amis said in a dry voice. She is a biddable student now. Is that not so, Egwene? Egwene's mouth set in a stubborn line. These wise ones did not know her well if they believed a Two Rivers woman would call herself biddable. On the other hand, she did not say anything. That was unexpected. As hard a lot as Aes Sedai, it appeared, these Aiel women. Her hour was slipping away, and impatience bubbled to try this method now. If Elaine woke her, it might take hours to get back to sleep. In 7 days, she said, one of us will meet you here again. Egwene nodded. In 7 days, Rand will have shown himself to the clan chiefs as he who comes with the dawn, and the Aiel will all be behind him. The wise one's eyes shifted slightly, and Amis adjusted her shawl. Egwene did not see it. The light knows what he means to do then. In 7 days, Nynaeve said, Elaine and I will have taken whatever Liandrin is hunting away from the lot of them. Or else, very likely, the Black Aja would have it. So the wise ones were not more certain the Aiel would follow Rand than Egwene was of his plans. No certainty anywhere, but no point in burdening Egwene with more doubts either. When one of us sees you next, we'll have laid them by the heels and stuffed them all in sacks to cart to the tower for trial. Try to be careful, Nynaeve. I know you don't know how to try anyway. Tell Elaine I said so too. She isn't as bold as you are, but she can come close. Amis and Bear each laid a hand on Egwene's shoulder, and they were gone. Try to be careful, fool girl. She was always careful. What had Egwene been about to say, rather than bold? Nynaeve folded her arms tightly in lieu of pulling her braid. Maybe better she did not know. She realized she had not told Egwene about Egyanin. Perhaps best not to stir up Egwene's memories of her captivity. Nynaeve could remember all too well the other woman's nightmares for weeks after she was freed, waking up screaming that she would not be chained. Much the best to let it lie. It was not as if Egwene need ever meet the Shan-Chan woman. Burn that woman. Burn Egyanin to ash. Burn her.
I don't really have a
This
top
is not
5.
using my time wisely.
There's
She
too
said
many of
aloud.
them I like. I
The
can't
words
cut it
echoed
down
through
that
the
low.
tall columns. With the other women gone, they looked even more foreboding than before, more a hiding place for unseen watchers and things that jumped out at you. Time to be away. First, though, she changed her hair to a tassel of long, narrow braids, her dress to clinging folds of dark green silk. A transparent veil covered her mouth and nose, fluttering slightly when she breathed. With a grimace, she added beads of green jade woven into the thin plaits. Should any of the Black Sisters be using their stolen ter'angreal to enter the world of dreams and see her in the Panarch's palace, they would think her only a Tarabana woman who had dreamed herself there in more ordinary fashion. Some knew her by sight, though. Lifting a handful of bead-strung braids, she smiled. Pale honey. She had not realized that was possible. I wonder what I look like. Could they still know me? Suddenly a tall stand mirror stood beside Callandor. In the glass her big brown eyes widened in shock. Her rosebud of a mouth fell open. She had Rendra's face. Her features flickered back and forth, eyes and hair flashing darker, then lighter. Straining, she settled them as the innkeeper's. No one would know her now, and Egwene thought she did not know how to be
Cool.
careful.
That's some alright
Closing her
ones there.
eyes, she concentrated on Tanchico, on the Panarch's palace, on need. Something dangerous to Ran, to the dragon reborn. Need. Around her, Tel Riod shifted. She felt it, a sliding lurch, and opened her eyes eagerly to see what she had found. It was a bedchamber, as big as any six at the three-plum court, the white plaster walls worked in painted friezes, golden lamps hanging from the ceiling by gilded chains. The tall posts of the bed spread carved limbs and leaves in a canopy above the mattresses. A woman well short of her middle years stood stiffly with her back to one of the posts at the foot of the bed. She was really quite lovely, in that pouty-mouthed way that Nynaeve herself had adopted. Atop her dark braids sat a crown of golden trefoil leaves among rubies and pearls, with a moonstone larger than a goose egg, and around her neck hung a broad stole, dangling to her knees, and embroidered along its length with frieze. Aside from crown and stole, she wore only a glistening coat of sweat. Her tremulous eyes were fixed on the woman lying at her ease on a low couch. The second woman's back was to Nynaeve, as misty as Egwene had been earlier. She was short and slight, dark hair flowing loose to her shoulders, wide-skirted gown of pale yellow silk, definitely not Tarabona. Nynaeve did not have to see her face to know it had large blue eyes and a fox-like shape, or see the bonds of air holding the woman against the bedpost to know she was looking at Tamail Kinderoga.
Wow. Give me 1 second. I was wondering why I got so quiet. My speaker went dead. Had to connect to my spare speaker.
Laughing. Are you not enjoying yourself? What shall I teach you next? I know. I have loved 1,000 sailor men. She waggled an admonishing finger. Be sure you learn all the words properly, Amathera. You know I would not want to. What are you gaping at? Abruptly, Nynaeve realized the woman against the bedpost, Amathera, the panel, was staring straight at her. Tamile shifted lazily as though to turn her head. Nynaeve clamped her eyes shut. Need. Shift. Letting herself sag against the narrow column, Nynaeve gulped air as if she had run 20 miles, not even wondering where she was. Her heart pounded like a wild drum. Speak of landing in a viper's den. Tamile Kinderode, the black sister Amiko had said enjoyed causing pain, enjoyed it enough to have made one of the Black Aja comment, and her not able to channel a spark. She could have ended up decorating a bedpost beside Amathera. Light! She shivered, seeing it. Calm yourself, woman. You are out of there. And even if Tamile saw you, she saw a honey-haired woman who vanished, just a Taraboner who dreamed herself into Tel Run Riod for a moment. Surely Tamile could not have been aware of her long enough to sense she could channel. Even when she could not do it, the ability was there to be felt by one who shared it. Only a moment. Not long enough, with luck. At least she knew Amathera's situation now. The woman was certainly no ally of Tamile. This method of searching had already repaid use. But not enough. Not yet. Controlling her breathing as best she could, she looked around. Rows of the thin white columns ran the length and breadth of a huge chamber, nearly as wide as it was long, with smooth polished white floor stones below and gilded bosses on the ceiling high above. A thick rope of white silk ran all the way around the room on waist-high posts of dark polished wood, except where it would have blocked the doorways with double-pointed arches. Stands and open cabinets lined the walls, and the bones of peculiar beasts with more display cases out in the floor also roped off. The exhibition hall of the palace, from its description, what she sought must be in the square chamber. Her next step was not as blind as the first. There were certainly no vipers, no Tamiles here. A handsome woman suddenly appeared beside a glass case with 4 carved legs out in the middle of the floor. She was no Taraboner, with her dark hair falling in waves to her shoulders, yet that was not what made Nynaeve gape. The woman's dress seemed to be mist, sometimes silvery and opaque, sometimes gray and so thin as to show her limbs and body clearly. From wherever she had dreamed herself here, she assuredly had a vivid imagination to conceive that. Even the scandalous demonic she had heard of surely could not equal this. The woman smiled at the glass case, then continued on up the hall, stopping on the far side to study something Nynaeve could not make out, something dark atop a white stone stand. Frowning, Nynaeve released a fistful of honey-colored braids. The woman would disappear at any moment. Few dreamed themselves into Tel Run Riod for long. Of course, it did not matter if the woman saw them. There was certainly no one on their list of black sisters. And yet she seemed somehow. Nynaeve realized she had taken hold of a handful of braids again. The woman, of its own accord, her hand pulled, hard, and she stared at it in amazement. Her knuckles were white, her hand quivering. It was almost as if thinking of that woman, arms shaking, her hand tried to yank her hair out of her scalp. Why under the light? The mist-clad woman still stood in front of the distant white pedestal. Trembling spread from Nynaeve's arm into her shoulder. She had certainly never seen the woman before, and yet she tried to open her fingers. They only clamped down harder. Surely she never had. Shivering from head to toe, she hugged herself with the one arm she had free. Surely her teeth wanted to chatter. The woman seemed she wanted to weep. The woman images burst into her head, exploding. She slumped against the column beside her as if they had finished. Her eyes bulged. She saw it again. The chamber of falling blossoms, and that sturdily handsome woman surrounded by the glow of Saidar. Herself and Elaine babbling like children, fighting to be first to answer, pouring out everything they knew. How much had they told? It was difficult to bring out details, but she dimly remembered keeping some things back. Not because she wanted to. She would have told the woman anything, done anything she asked. Her face heated with shame and anger. If she had managed to hide any scraps, it was only because she had been so eager to answer the last question asked that she passed over earlier. It makes no sense, a small voice said in the back of her head. If she's a black sister I don't know about, why did she not hand us over to Leandrin? She could have. We'd have gone with her like lambs. Cold rage would not let her listen. A black sister had made her dance like a puppet and then told her to forget, ordered her to forget, and she had. Well, now the woman would find out what it was like to face her ready and forewarned. Before she could reach for the true source, Brigitta was suddenly beside the next column in that short white coat and wide yellow trousers gathered at the ankle. Brigitta, or some woman dreaming she was Brigitta, with golden hair in an elaborate braid. A warning finger pressed against her lips, she pointed at Nynaeve, then urgently toward one of the double-arched doorways behind them. Bright blue eyes compelling, she vanished. Nynaeve shook her head. Whoever the woman was, she had no time. Opening herself to Saidar, she turned, filled to overflowing with the one power and righteous wrath. The woman clothed in mist was gone. Gone! Because that golden-haired fool had distracted her. Perhaps that one was still about, waiting for her. Wrapped in the power, she strode through the doorway the woman had indicated. The golden-haired woman was waiting in a brightly carpeted hallway where unlit golden lamps gave off the scent of perfumed oil. She held a silver bow now, and the quiver of silver arrows hung at her waist. "Who are you?" Nynaeve demanded furiously. She would give the woman a chance to explain herself, and then teach her a lesson she would not soon forget. "Are you the same fool who shot at me in the waist, claiming she was Brigitta? I was about to teach a member of the Black Oddjaw manners when you let her get away." "I am Brigitta," the woman said, leaning on her bow. "At least, that is the name you would know. And the lesson might have been yours, here as surely as in the Threefold Land. I remember the lives I have lived as if they were books well read, the longer gone sooner than the nearer. But I remember well when I fought at Luz Theron's side. I will never forget Mogadin's face, any more than I will forget the face of Asmodeon, the man you almost disturbed at Roidion." Asmodeon? Mogadin? That woman was one of the Forsaken? A Forsaken in Tanchico, and one in Roidion, in the Waste. Egwene would certainly have said something if she knew. No way to warn her, not for 7 days. Anger and Saidar surged in her. "What are you doing here? I know that you all vanished after the Horn of Valir called you, but you were—" She trailed off, a trifle flustered at what she had been about to say, but the other woman calmly finished for her. "Dead? Those of us who are bound to the wheel are not dead as others are dead. Where better for us to wait until the wheel weaves us out in new lives than in the world of dreams?" Brigitta laughed suddenly. "I begin to talk as if I were a philosopher. In almost every life I can remember, I was born a simple girl who took up the bow. I am an archer, no more." "You're the heroine of 100 tales," Nynaeve said, "and I saw what your arrows did at Falma. Seanchan channeling did not touch you. Brigitta, we face near a dozen of the Black Oddjaw, and one of the Forsaken as well, it seems. We could use your help." The other woman grimaced, embarrassed and regretful. "I cannot, Nynaeve. I cannot touch the world of flesh unless the horn calls me again, or else the wheel weaves me out. If it did this moment, you would find only an infant mewling at her mother's breast. As for Falma, the horn had called us. We were not there as you were, in the flesh. That is why the power could not touch us. Here all is part of the dream, and the one power could destroy me as easily as you, more easily. I told you, I am an archer, a sometime soldier, no more. Her complex golden braid swung as she shook her head. I do not know why I am explaining. I should not even be talking to you. Why not? You've spoken to me before, and Egwene thought she saw you. That was you, wasn't it? Nynaeve frowned. How do you know my name? Do you just know things? I know what I see and hear. I have watched you and listened whenever I could find you. You and the other two women and the young man with his wolves. According to the precepts, we may speak to none who know they are in Tel Riyadh. And yet evil walks the dream as well as the world of flesh. You who fight it attract me. Even knowing I can do almost nothing, I find myself wanting to help you. But I cannot. It violates the precepts, precepts which have held me for so many turns of the wheel that in my oldest, faintest memories I know I had already lived 100 times, or 1,000. Speaking to you violates precepts as strong as law. It does, said a harsh male voice. Nynaeve jumped and almost lashed out with the power. The man was dark and strongly muscled, with the long hilts of two swords thrusting above his shoulders as he strode the few paces from where he had appeared to Birgitta. With what she had heard from Birgitta, the swords were enough to name him as Gadel Kane, but where fair, golden-haired Birgitta was as beautiful as in the stories, he was definitely not. In fact, he was perhaps as ugly a man as Nynaeve had ever seen, his face wide and flat, his heavy nose too big, and his mouth and gash far too broad. Birgitta smiled at him, though. Her cheekbones cheeks held more than fun. It was a surprise to see he was the shortest. Stocky and muscled as he was, powerful in his movements, he gave the impression of being taller than he was. We have almost always been linked, Birgitta told me, without taking her eyes from Kane's. He is usually born well before me, so I know my time approaches again when I cannot find him, and I usually hate him at first sight in the flesh, but we nearly always end lovers or wed. A simple thing, but I think we have spun it out in 1,000 variations. Kane ignored Nynaeve as though she did not exist. The precepts exist for a reason, Birgitta. Nothing but strife and trouble has ever come from breaking them. His voice was indeed harsh, Nynaeve realized, not at all like that of the man in the stories. Perhaps I can get by while evil fights, Birgitta said quietly. Or perhaps I simply hunger for the flesh again. It has been long since I was born last. The shadow rises again, Gadel. It rises here. We must fight it. That is the reason we were bound to the wheel. When the horn calls us, we will fight. When the wheel weaves us, we will fight. Not until then. He glowered at her. Have you forgotten what Mogadine promised you when we followed Luz Theron? I saw her, Birgitta. She will know you here. Birgitta turned to Nynaeve. I will aid you as I can, but do not expect too much. Tel Riyadh is the whole of my world, and I can do less here than you. Nynaeve blinked. The dark, heavy man had not moved that she had seen, but he suddenly stood 2 paces away, drawing a honing stone along one of his swords with a soft, silky rasp. Plainly, as far as he was concerned, Birgitta was speaking to the air. What can you tell of Mogadine, Birgitta? I must know what I can to face her. Leaning on her bow, Birgitta frowned thoughtfully. Facing Mogadine is difficult, and not only because she is forsaken. She hides and takes no risks. She attacks only where she sees weakness and moves only in shadows. If she fears defeat, she will run. She is not one to fight to the last, even when doing so has the chance of victory. A chance is not enough for Mogadine, but do not take her lightly. She is a serpent coiled in high grass, waiting her own moment to strike, with less compassion than the snake. Especially here, do not take her lightly. Lanfear always claimed Tel Iran Riyadh for her own, but Mogadeen could do things here far beyond Lanfear, though she has not Lanfear's strength in the world of flesh. I think she would not take the risk of confronting Lanfear. Nynaeve shivered, fear warring with the anger that let her contain the power. Mogadeen, Lanfear. This woman spoke so casually of the Forsaken. Brigitta, what did Mogadeen promise you? She knew what I was, even though I did not. How, I do not know. Brigitta glanced at Kane. He appeared absorbed in his sword, but she lowered her voice anyway. She promised to make me weep alone for as long as the wheel turned. She said it as a fact that simply had not happened yet. And yet, you are willing to help. As I can, Nynaeve. Remember that I told you not to expect too much. Once more she looked at the man sharpening his sword. We will meet again, Nynaeve, if you are careful and survive. Hefting her silver bow, she went to put an arm around Kane's shoulders and murmur in his ear. Whatever she said, Kane was laughing as they vanished. Nynaeve shook her head. Careful. Everybody was telling her to be careful. A legendary hero who said she would help, only there was not much she could do. And one of the Forsaken in Tanchico. The thought of Mogadeen, of what the woman had done to her, strengthened her anger until the one power pulsed in her like the sun. Abruptly she was back in the great hall where she'd been standing before, almost certain the woman had returned. But the hall was empty of life except for herself. Fury and the power roared through her till she thought her skin would crisp and blacken. Mogadeen or any of the Black Sisters could sense her far more easily holding the power than without, but she held it anyway. She almost wanted them to find her so she could strike at them. Tamail was very likely still in Tel Iran Riyadh. If she went back up to that bedchamber, she could settle Tamail once and for all. She could settle Tamail and warn the rest. It was enough to make her growl. What had Mogadeen been smiling at? Striding out to the case, a wide glass box atop a carved table, she peered in. 6 mismatched figurines stood in a circle beneath the glass. A foot-tall nude woman balanced on the toes of one foot, dancing, all flowing lines, and a shepherdess less than half as large, playing the pipes with his crook on his shoulder and a sheep at his feet, were as similar as any two. She had no doubt what had attracted the Forsaken's smile, though. In the center of the circle, a red-lacquered wooden stand held a disc as big as a man's hand, divided into halves by a sinuous line, one side gleaming whiter than snow, the other blacker than pitch. It was made of quaindiar, she knew. She had seen its like, and only 7 had ever been made. One of the seals on the Dark One's prison, a focus for one of the locks that held him away from the world in Shael Ghul. This was perhaps as important a discovery as whatever it was that threatened Rand. This had to be gotten away from the Black Adja. Suddenly she became aware of her reflection. The case was the finest glass, without bubbles, and gave an image as clear as a mirror, if fainter. Dark green folds of silk draped her body so they showed every curve of breast and hip and thigh. Long honey braids full of jade beads framed a face with big brown eyes and a pouting mouth. The glow of Saidar did not show, of course. Disguised so she did not even know herself, she walked about carrying a painted sign that screamed Aes Sedai. I can be careful, she muttered. Yet she held on a moment longer. The power filling her was like life, bubbling along her limbs, all the pleasures she had ever known seeping through her flesh. In the end, feeling foolish took enough edge from her anger to allow her to let go. Or maybe it dulled her anger to where she could no longer hold on. Whatever the reason, it did not help her search. What she was after had to be somewhere in this huge hall among all these displays. Pulling her eyes away from what looked like the bones of a toothy lizard 10 paces long, she closed them. Need. Danger to the dragon reborn. To Rand. Need. Shift. She was standing inside the white silk rope along the walls, the edge of a white stone pedestal touching her dress. What lay on top did not look very dangerous at first glance, a necklace and two bracelets of jointed black metal, but she could come no closer to anything than this. Not without sitting on it, she thought wryly. She jerked her hand out to touch it. Pain, sorrow, suffering, and jerked it back, gasping, the raw emotions still echoing in her head. Even her faint doubts vanished. This was what the Black Ajah was hunting. And if it still sat on this pedestal in Tel Iran Riyadh, it sat there in the waking world, too. She had beaten them. This white stone pedestal. Whirling around, she stared toward the glass case that held the Quaindiar seal, located the place she had been standing when she first saw Mogadine. The woman had been looking at this pedestal, at the bracelets and collar. Mogadine had to know, but everything around her spun and blurred, fading. Wake up, Nynaeve, Elaine muttered, suppressing a yawn as she shook the sleeping woman's shoulder. It has to be an hour by now. I want some sleep, too. Wake up, or I'll see how you like your head in a bucket of water. Nynaeve's eyes popped open, staring up at her. If she knows what it is, why hasn't she given it to them? If they know who she is, why does she have to look at it until I run Riyadh? Is she hiding from them, too? What are you talking about? Braids tossing about as she wriggled up to sit with her back against the head of the bed, Nynaeve jerked her silk shift down. I will tell you what I am talking about. Elaine's mouth fell open as Nynaeve unfolded the tale of what her meeting with Egwene had become. Searching with need, Mogadine, Brigitta and Gadel Kane, the black metal necklace and bracelets, Asmodeon in the waist, one of the seals on the Dark One's prison in the Panarch's palace. Elaine sank down weakly onto the side of the mattress, long before Nynaeve came to Tamil and the Panarch, thrown in almost as an afterthought, and changing her appearance, masquerading as Rendra. If Nynaeve's face had not been grimly serious, Elaine could have thought it one of Tom's wilder stories. Egyanin, sitting up cross-legged in her linen shift, hands on knees, looked close to disbelieving. Elaine hoped Nynaeve did not start a row because she had loosed the woman's wrists. Mogadine, that was the most horrifying part, one of the Forsaken in Tanchico, one of the Forsaken weaving the power around the two of them, making them tell her everything. Elaine could not remember a bit of it. The thought was enough to press both her hands to a suddenly queasy stomach. I don't know whether Mogadine lied. Could she really have just walked in and made us... Is hiding from Leandrin and the others, Nynaeve? It sounds what Brigitta giving her advice, said of her. Whatever Mogadine is up to, Nynaeve said in a tight voice, I mean to pick a bone clean with her. She slumped back against the flower-carved headboard. In any case, we have to get the seal away from them, as well as this necklace and bracelets. Elaine shook her head. How can jewelry be dangerous to Rand? Are you sure? Are they a Terangrial of some sort? What did they look like exactly? They looked like a necklace and bracelets, Nynaeve snapped in exasperation. Two jointed bracelets made of some black metal, and a wide necklace like a black collar. Her eyes darted to Egyanin, but no faster than Elaine's. Unperturbed, the dark-haired woman knelt up to sit on her heels. I have never heard of an idam made for a man, or any like the one you describe. No one tries to control a man who can channel. That is exactly what this is for, Elaine said slowly. Oh, light. I suppose I was hoping it didn't exist. At least Nynaeve had found it first. At least they had a chance to stop it being used against Rand. Nynaeve's eyes narrowed as she took in Egyanin's free hands, but she did not mention them. Mogadine must be the only one who knows. It makes no sense.
Be right back, everyone.
If we can find a way into the palace, we can take the seal and the... whatever it is. And if we can bring Amathera out as well, Leandrin and her cronies will find the Panarch's Legion and the Civil Watch and maybe the White Cloaks closing in. They'll not all be able to channel their way out of that. The problem is getting inside undetected. I have had a few thoughts on that, Elaine told her, but I fear the men are going to give us difficulties over it. You leave them to me, Nynaeve snorted. A thumping clatter rose in the hall. A man shouted. As quickly as it began, silence fell once more. Tom was on watch out there. Elaine darted to pull open the door, embracing Saidar as she rushed out, but Nynaeve scrambled off the bed right behind her, Egyanin as well. Tom was just picking himself up off the floor, a hand to his head. Julian with his staff and Baal Doman with his cudgel stood over a man with pale yellow hair, lying face down on the floor, unconscious. Elaine hurried to Tom, trying gently to help him up. He gave her a grateful smile, but stubbornly pushed her hands away. I am quite all right, child. All right? A knot was rising on his temple. The fellow was walking down the hall when suddenly he kicked me in the head. After my purse, I suppose. Just like that. Kicked in the head and he was all right. He would have had it too, Julian said, if I had not come to see if Tom wanted a relief. Did I not decide? Doman muttered. Their hostility seemed less focused for a change. It took Elaine only a moment to realize why. Nynaeve and Egyanin were in the hall in their shifts. Julian was eyeing them both in an approving manner that would have caused trouble if Rendra had seen it, though he was at least trying not to be obvious. Doman made no effort at all to hide his frank appraisal of Egyanin, crossing his arms and pursing his lips in disgusting fashion while looking her up and down. The situation dawned on the other women quickly, but their reactions were quite different. Nynaeve, in her thin white silk, gave the thief-catcher a flat stare and strode stiffly into the room, poking a somewhat flushed face back around the side of the doorframe. Egyanin, whose linen shift was considerably longer and thicker than Nynaeve's, Egyanin, who had been cool serenity while being made prisoner, who fought like a warder, Egyanin went wide-eyed and crimson-faced, gasping in horror. Elaine stared, amazed, as the Shanshan woman gave a mortified shriek and leaped back inside. Doors flung open and down the hall, heads popped out. They vanished instantly to the bang of slamming doors at the sight of a man stretched out on the floor and others standing over him. Heavy dragging noises suggested people blocking themselves in with beds or wardrobes. Long moments later, Egyanin finally peeked out opposite Nynaeve, still scarlet to her hair. Elaine really did not understand. The woman was in her shift, true, but it covered her very nearly as well as Elaine's Tarabona dress did. Still, Julian and Doman had no right to ogle. She fixed the pair with a stare that should have set them to rights immediately. Unfortunately, Doman was too busy chuckling and rubbing his upper lip to notice. At least Julian saw, even if he did sigh heavily the way men did when they considered themselves put upon unfairly. Avoiding her eyes, he bent to heave the pale-haired fellow onto his back. A handsome enough man, slender. I know this fellow, Julian exclaimed. This is the man who tried to rob me. Or so I thought, he added more slowly. I do not believe in coincidence, not unless the Dragon Reborn is in the city. Elaine exchanged frowns with Nynaeve. Surely the stranger was not in the employ of Leandrin. The Black Ajah would not use men to sneak about the halls any more than they would have hired street toughs. Elaine moved her gaze to Egyanin questioningly. Nynaeve's was more demanding. He is Shanshan, Egyanin said after a moment. A rescue attempt? Nynaeve murmured dryly, but the other woman shook her head. I do not doubt he was looking for me, but not for rescue, I think. If he knows, or even suspects, that I let Bethamin go free, he would be wanting to talk with me. Elaine suspected it was rather more than talk, confirmed when Egyanin added, It might be best if you slit his throat. He may try to make trouble for you, too, if he thinks you are my friends, or if he discovers you are Aes Sedai." The big Ilianer smuggler gave her a shocked look, and Julian's jaw dropped almost to his chest. Tom, on the other hand, nodded in a disturbingly thoughtful fashion. "We are not here to slit Shan throats," Nynaeve said, as though that might change later. "Bale, Julian, put him out in the alley behind the inn. By the time he wakes, he'll be lucky to have his small clothes. Tom, find Rendra and tell her we want strong tea in the Chamber of Falling Blossoms. And ask if she has any willow bark or akum. I will make you something for your head." The three men stared at her. "Well, move," she snapped. "We have plans to make." She barely gave Elaine time to get back inside before closing the door with a bang and beginning to pull her dress over her head. Egyanin scrambled into hers as though the men were still looking at her. "The better way is to ignore them, Egyanin," Elaine said. It was odd to be advising someone older than Nynaeve, but however competent the Shan woman was in other ways, she clearly knew little about men. "It only encourages them otherwise. I do not know why," she admitted, "but it does. You were quite decently covered, really." Egyanin's head pushed out at the top of her dress. "Decent? I am not a serving girl. I am no shade dancer." Her scowl became a perplexed frown. "He is rather good-looking, though. I had not thought him so before." Wondering what a shade dancer was, Elaine went to help her with her buttons. "Rendra will have something to say to you if you allow Julian to flirt with you." The dark-haired woman gave her a startled look over her shoulder. "The thief-catcher? It was Baal Doman I meant. A properly set-up man, but a smuggler," she sighed regretfully. "A lawbreaker." Elaine supposed there was no accounting for tastes. Nynaeve certainly loved Lan, and he was much too stone-faced and intimidating. But Baal Doman? The man was half as wide as he was tall, as thick as an ogier. "You chatter like Rendra, Elaine," Nynaeve snapped. She was struggling to do up her dress, both hands behind her. "If you have finished blathering about men, perhaps you won't mind skipping over the new seamstress you've no doubt found? We must make plans. If we wait until we're with the men, they will try to take it over, and I am in no mood to waste time putting them in their place. Have you finished with her yet? I could use some help myself." Quickly fastening Egyanin's last small button, Elaine went coolly to Nynaeve. She did not talk about men and dresses, not nearly as much as Rendra. Holding her braids out of the way, Nynaeve gave her a frown when she tugged sharply at the other woman's dress to do up the buttons. The close-spaced triple row up the back was necessary, not simply ornament. Nynaeve would let Rendra talk her into the most fashionably tight bodices, and then say other people spent all their time thinking about clothes. She certainly thought of other things. "I have been thinking how we can move inside the palace unnoticed, Nynaeve. We can be all but invisible." As she talked, Nynaeve's frowns smoothed out. Nynaeve herself had conceived a way to enter the palace. When Egyanin made a few suggestions, Nynaeve's mouth tightened, but the notions were sensible, and even Nynaeve could not reject them out of hand. By the time they were ready to go down to the Chamber of Falling Blossoms, they had a plan agreed upon, and no intention of letting the men change a whit of it. Mogadin, the Black Ajah, whoever were running things in the Panarch's palace, were going to lose their prizes before they knew what had happened.
Chapter 53. The Price of a Departure. Only 3 candles and 2 lamps lit the common room of the Wine Spring Inn, since candles and oil both were in short supply. The spears and other weapons were gone from the walls. The barrel that had held old swords was empty. The lamps stood on 2 of the tables pushed together in front of the tall stone fireplace, where Marn Alvear and Days Conger and others of the women's circle were going over lists of the scanty food remaining in Emmons Field. Farron tried not to listen. At another table, Fail's honing stone made a soft, steady whisk-whisk as she sharpened one of her knives. A bow lay in front of her, and a bristling quiver hung at her belt. She had turned out to be a fairly good shot, but he hoped she never discovered that it was a boy's bow. She could not draw a man's Two Rivers longbow, though she refused to admit it. Shifting his axe so it would not dig into his side, he tried to put his mind back on what he was discussing with the men around the table with him. Not that all of them were keeping their own attention where it should be. "They have lamps," Sen muttered, "and we make do with tallow." The gnarled old man glared at the pair of candles in brass candlesticks. "Give over, Sen," Tam said wearily, pulling pipe and tobacco pouch from behind his sword belt. "Give over." "If we had to read or write," Abel said, his voice less patient than the words, "we'd have lamps." A bandage was wound around his temples. As if to remind the Thatcher that he was mayor, Bran adjusted the silver medallion hanging on his wide chest, showing a pair of scales. "Keep your mind to the business at hand, Sen. I'll have none of your wasting Perrin's time." "I just think we should have lamps," Sen complained. "Perrin would tell me if I was wasting his time." Perrin sighed. The knight tried to drag his eyelids down. He wished it were someone else's turn to represent the village council. Harl Luhan, or John Thane, or Samuel Craw, or anybody but Sen with his carping. But then sometimes he wished one of these men would turn to him and say, "This is business for the mayor and the council, young fellow. You go on back to the forge. We'll let you know what to do." Instead, they worried about wasting his time, deferred to him. Time. How many attacks had there been in the 7 days since the first? He was not sure any longer. The bandage on Abel's head irritated Perrin. The Aes Sedai only healed the most serious wounds now. If a man could manage without, they let him. It was not that there were many badly wounded yet, but as Varen pointed out wryly, even an Aes Sedai only had so much strength. Apparently, their trick with the catapult stones took as much as healing. For once, he did not want to be reminded of limits to Aes Sedai strength. Not many badly wounded. Yet. "How are the arrows holding out?" he asked. That was what he was supposed to be thinking about. "Well enough," Tam said, puffing his pipe alight from one of the candles. "We still recover most of what we shoot, in daylight at least. They drag a lot of their dead away at night. Fodder for the cookpots, I suppose, and we lose those." The other men were digging out their pipes too, from pouches and coat pockets. Sen muttering that he seemed to have forgotten his pouch. Grumbling, Bran passed his across, his bald pate gleaming in the candlelight. Perrin rubbed at his forehead. What had he meant to ask next? The stakes. There was fighting at the stakes in most attacks now, especially at night. How many times had the Trollocs nearly broken through? 3? 4? Does anybody have a spear or some sort of polearm now? What's left to make more? Silence answered him, and he lowered his hand. The other men were staring at him. "You asked that yesterday," Abel said gently. "And Harl told you then there isn't a scythe or a pitchfork left in the village that hasn't been made into a weapon. We've more than we have hands for, in truth." "Yes, of course. It just slipped my mind." A snatch of conversation from the women's circle caught his ear. "Mustn't let the men know," Lauren was saying softly, as if repeating a caution voiced before. "Of course not," Daze snorted, but not much louder. "If the fools find out the women are on half rations, they'll insist on eating the same. And we can't." Perrin closed his eyes, tried to close his ears. Of course. The men did the fighting. The men had to keep their strength up. Simple. At least none of the women had had to fight yet. Except the 2 Aiel women, of course, and Fail. But she was smart enough to stay back when it came to pushing spears among the stakes. That was the reason he had found the bow for her. She had the heart of a leopard, and more courage than any 2 men. "I think it is time you went to bed, Perrin," Bran suggested. "You cannot go on like this. Sleeping an hour here and an hour there. Scrubbing his beard vigorously, Perrin tried to look alert. I'll sleep later, when it was over. Are the men getting enough sleep? I've seen some sitting up when they should be. The front door banged open to admit skinny Daniel Lewin out of the night, bow in hand, and all in a lather. He wore one of the swords from the barrel on his hip. Tam had been giving classes when he had the time, and sometimes one of the warders did as well. Before Daniel could open his mouth, Day snapped, "Were you raised in a barn, Daniel Lewin?" "You can certainly treat my door a little more gently." Mara divided her meaning look between the lanky man and Day's, a reminder that it was her door. Daniel ducked his head, clearing his throat. "Pardon, Mr. Xavier," he said hastily. "Pardon, Wisdom. Sorry to burst in, but I've a message for Perrin." He hurried to the table of men as if afraid the women would stop him again. "The White Cloaks brought in a man who wants to talk to you, Perrin. He won't talk to anybody else. He's hurt bad, Perrin. They only brought him to the edge of the village. I don't think he can make it as far as the inn." Perrin pushed himself to his feet. "I'm coming." Not another attack, at any rate. They were worst at night. Fail snatched up her bow and joined them before he reached the door, and Aram stood up, hesitating from the shadows on the foot of the stairs. Sometimes Perrin forgot the man was there, he kept so still. He looked odd with that sword strapped on his back atop his grimy, yellow-striped tinker coat, his eyes so bright, hardly ever seeming to blink, and his face without expression. Neither Rain or Isla had spoken to their grandson since the day he picked up that sword. Nor to Perrin, either. "If you're coming, come," he said gruffly, and Aram fell in at his heels. The man followed him like a hound whenever he was not pestering Tam or Ivan or Tomas to teach him that sword. It was as if he had replaced his family and people with Perrin. Perrin would have done without the responsibility if he could, but there it was. Moonlight shone down on thatched roofs. Few houses had a light in more than one window. Stillness clung to the village. Some 30 of the companions stood guard outside the inn with their bows, as many wearing swords as could find them. Everyone had adopted that name, and Perrin found himself using it too, to his private disgust. The reason for guards on the inn, or wherever Perrin was, lay on the green, no longer so crowded with sheep and cows. Campfires crowded above the wine spring, beyond where that fool wolf-head banner hung limp now. Bright pools in the darkness, surrounded by pale cloaks gleaming with the moon. No one had wanted white cloaks in their homes, already crowded, and Bornhall did not want his soldiers split up in any case. The man seemed to think the village would turn on him and his men any moment. If they followed Perrin, they must be dark friends. Even Perrin's eyes could not make out faces around the fires, but he thought he could feel Bornhald's stare, waiting, hating. Daniel readied 10 companions to escort Perrin, all young men who should have been laughing and carousing with him, all with bows ready to see him safe. Aram did not join them as Daniel led the way down the dark dirt street. It was Perrin he was with, and no one else. Fail kept hard by Perrin's side, dark eyes shining in the moonlight, scanning the surroundings as though she were his whole protection. Where the old road entered Emmons Field, the blocking wagons had been drawn aside to admit the White Cloak patrol, 20 snow-cloaked men with lances who sat their horses in burnished armor, no less impatient than their stamping mounts. They stood out in the night for any eye, and most Trollocs could see as well in darkness as Perrin. But the White Cloaks insisted on their patrols. Sometimes their scouting had brought warnings, and maybe their harassment kept the Trollocs a little off balance. It would have been good, though, if he had known what they were doing before it was done. A cluster of villagers and farmers wearing bits of old armor and a few rusty helmets stood clustered around a man in a farmer's coat lying in the roadway. They gave way for Fail and him, and he went to one knee beside the man. The odor of blood was strong. Sweat glistened on the man's moon-shadowed face. A A thumb-thick Trolloc arrow, like a small spear, was stuck through his chest.
Baron, Golden Eyes,
he muttered hoarsely, laboring for breath.
Must get through. To Perrin, Golden Eyes.
Has someone sent for one of the Aes Sedai? Perrin demanded, lifting the man as gently as he could, cradling his head. He did not listen for the answer. He did not think this man would last till an Aes Sedai came.
I am Perrin. Golden Eyes, I cannot see very well.
His wide, wild stare was right at Perrin's face. If he could see at all, the fellow must see his eyes shining golden in the dark.
I am Perrin Golden Eyes,
he said reluctantly. The man seized his collar, pulling his face close with surprising strength.
We are coming. Sent to tell you. We are
His head fell back, eyes staring at nothing now.
The light be with his soul,
Fail murmured, slinging her bow across her back. After a moment, Perrin pried the man's fingers loose. Does anyone know him? The Two Rivers men exchanged glances, shook their heads. Perrin looked up at the mounted whitecloaks. Did he say anything else while you were bringing him in? Where did you find him? Jarrett Byer stared down at him, gaunt-faced and hollow-eyed, an image of death. The other whitecloaks looked away, but Byer always made himself meet Perrin's yellow eyes, especially at night when they glowed. Byer growled under his breath. Perrin heard shadows spawn, and booted his horse in the ribs. The patrol galloped into the village, as eager to be away from Perrin as from Trollocs. Aram stared after them, expressionless, one hand over his shoulder to finger his sword hilt. They said they found him 3 or 4 miles south. Daniel hesitated, then added, They say the Trollocs are all scattered out in little bunches, Perrin. Maybe they're finally giving up. Perrin laid the stranger back down. We are coming. Keep a close watch. Maybe some family who tried to hold on to their farm is finally coming in. He did not believe anyone could have survived out there this long, but it might be so. Don't shoot anybody by mistake. He staggered to his feet, and Fail put a hand on his arm.
It is time you were in bed, Perrin. You have to sleep sometime.
He only looked at her. He should have made her stay in Tyr. Somehow he should have made her. If he had only thought well enough, he could have. One of the runners, a curly-haired boy about chest-high, slipped through the Two Rivers men to tug at Perrin's sleeve. Perrin did not know him. There were many families in from the countryside.
There's something moving in the westwood, Lord Perrin. They sent me to tell you.
Don't call me that, Perrin told him sharply. If he did not stop the children, the companions are going to start using it too. Go tell them I will be there. The boy darted away.
You belong in your bed, Fail said firmly. Tomas can handle any attack very well.
It isn't an attack, or the boy would have said so, and somebody would be sounding Sen's bugle. She hung on to his arm, trying to pull him toward the inn, and so she was dragged along when he started the opposite way. After a few futile minutes, she gave up and pretended she had been merely holding his arm all along. But she muttered to herself. She still seemed to think that if she spoke softly enough, he could not hear. She began with foolish, mule-headed, and muscle-brained. After that, it escalated. It was quite a little procession, her muttering at him, Aram healing him, Daniel and the 10 companions surrounding him like a guard of honor. If he had not been so tired, he would have felt a proper fool. There were guards spaced in small clusters all along the sharp-staked fence to watch the night, each with a boy for a runner. At the west end of the village, the men on guard were all gathered up against the inside of the broad barrier, fingering spears and bows as they peered toward the westwood. Even with the moonlight, the trees had to be blackness in their eyes. Tomas's cloak seemed to make parts of him vanish in the night. Bane and Chiad were with him. For some reason, the 2 maidens had spent every night at this end of Emmons Field since Loyal and Gall left.
I'd not have bothered you, the warder said to Perrin. But there only seems to be one out there.
and I thought you might be able to... Perrin nodded. Everyone knew about his vision, especially in darkness. The Two Rivers people seemed to think it something special, something that marked him out an idiot hero. What the warders thought, or the Aes Sedai, he had no idea. He was too tired to care tonight. 7 days, and how many attacks? The edge of the Westwood lay 500 paces away. Even to his eyes, the trees ran together in shadows. Something moved. Something big enough to be a Trolloc. A big shape carrying... The burden lifted an arm. A human. A tall shadow carrying a human. "We will not shoot!" he shouted. He wanted to laugh. In fact, he realized he was laughing. "Come on! Come on, Loyal!" The dim shape lumbered forward faster than a man could run, resolving into the Ogier, speeding toward the village carrying Gaul. Two Rivers men shouted encouragement as if it were a race. "Run, Ogier! Run! Run!" Perhaps it was a race. More than one assault had come out of those woods. Short of the stakes, Loyal slowed with a lurch. There was barely room for his thick legs to edge through the barrier sideways. Once on the village side, he let the Aielman down and sank to the ground, leaning back against the hedge, panting, tufted ears drooping wearily. Gaul limped on one leg until he could sit too, with Bane and Chia both fussing over his left thigh, where his breeches were ripped and black with dry blood. He only had 2 spears left, and his quiver gaped emptily. Loyal's axe was gone too. "You fool, Ogier," Perrin laughed fondly. "Going off like that? I ought to let Day's Congress switch you for a runaway. At least you're alive. At least you're back." His voice sank at that. Alive, and back in Emond's Field.
"We did it, Perrin,"
Loyal panted, a tired, drum-like boom.
4 days ago. We closed the way gate. It will take the elders or an Aes Sedai to open it again.
"He carried me most of the way from the mountains,"
Gaul said.
The Night Runner and perhaps 50 Trollocs chased us the first 3 days, but Loyal outran them."
He was trying to push the maidens away without much success.
"Lie still, Sharad,"
Chiad snapped.
"or I will say I have touched you armed and allowed you to choose how your honor stands."
Ayuk gave a delighted laugh. Perrin did not understand, but the remark reduced the imperturbable Aielman to splutters. He let the maidens tend his leg.
"Are you all right, Loyal?" Perrin asked. "Are you hurt?"
The Ogier pulled himself up with an obvious effort, swaying for a moment like a tree about to fall. His ears still hung limp.
"No, I am not hurt, Perrin. Only tired. Do not worry yourself about me. A long time out of the steading. Visits are not enough."
He shook his head as if his thoughts had wandered. His wide hand engulfed Perrin's shoulder.
"I will be fine after a little sleep."
He lowered his voice. For an Ogier, he did. It was still a huge bumblebee rumble.
"It is very bad out there, Perrin. We followed the last bands down, for the most part. We locked the gate, but I think there must be several thousand Trollocs in the Two Rivers already, and maybe as many as 50 Murdral."
"Not so," Luke announced loudly. He had galloped up along the edge of the houses from the direction of the North Road. He reined his rearing black stallion to a flashy halt, forehoofs pawing. "You are no doubt fine at singing to trees, Ogier, but fighting Trollocs is something different. I estimate less than 1,000 now. A formidable force, to be sure, but nothing these stout defenses and brave men cannot hold at bay. Another trophy for you, Lord Perrin Golden Eyes." Laughing, he tossed a bulging cloth bag at Perrin. The bottom gleamed darkly wet in the moonlight. Perrin caught it out of the air and hurled it well over the stakes despite its weight. 4 or 5 Trolloc heads, no doubt, and perhaps a Murdral. The man brought in his trophies every night, still seeming to expect them to be put up for everyone to admire. A bunch of the Coplans and Congers had given him a feast the night he came in with a pair of Fade's heads. "Do I also know nothing of fighting?" Gaul demanded, struggling to his feet. "I say there are several thousand." Luke's teeth showed white in a smile. "How many days have you spent in the Blight, Aiel?" "I have spent many." Perhaps it was more snarl than smile. "Many. Believe what you wish, Golden Eyes. The endless days will bring what they bring, as they always have." He pulled the stallion up on its hind legs again to whirl about, and galloped in among the houses and the trees that had once been the rim of the Westwood. The Two Rivers men shifted uneasily, peering after him or out into the night.
"He is wrong,"
Loyal said.
"Gaul and I saw what we saw."
His face sagged wearily, broad mouth turned down and long eyebrows drooping on his cheeks. No wonder if he had carried Gaul for 3 or 4 days. "You have done a lot, Loyal," Baron said. "You and Gaul both. A great thing. I'm afraid your bedroom has half a dozen tinkers in it now, but Mistress Alvir will make you up a pallet. It is time for you to get some of that sleep you want." "And time for you as well, Baron Ibarra." Scudding clouds made moon shadows play across Fail's bold nose and high cheekbones. She was so beautiful, but her voice was firm enough for a wagon bed. "If you do not go now, I will have Loyal carry you. You can hardly stand." Gaul was having trouble walking with his wounded leg. Bane supported him from one side. He tried to stop Chiat from taking the other, but she murmured something that sounded like "I shine" in a threatening way. And Bane laughed, and the Aielman allowed them both to help him, growling furiously to himself. Whatever the maidens were going on about, it did have Gaul in a taking. Tomas clapped Perrin on the shoulder. "Go, man. Everyone needs to sleep." He himself sounded good for 3 more days without it. Perrin nodded. He let Fail guide him back to the Wine Spring Inn with Loyal and the Aiel following, and Aram and Dan'l and the 10 companions encircling him. He was not sure when the others fell away, but somehow he and Fail were alone in his room on the 2nd floor of the inn. "Whole families are making do with no more space than this," he muttered. A candle burned on the stone mantel over the small fireplace. Others did without, but Marin lit one here as soon as it turned dark, so he would not have to be bothered. "I can sleep outside with Dan'l and Ban and the others." "Do not be an idiot," Fail said, making it sound affectionate. "If Alana and Baron each has her own room, you should too." He realized she had his coat off and was untying the laces of his shirt. "I am not too tired to undress myself." He pushed her gently outside. "You take everything off," she ordered. "Everything, do you hear? You cannot sleep properly fully dressed, the way you seem to think." "I will," he promised. When he had the door closed, he did tug off his boots before blowing out the candle and lying down. Marn would not like dirty boots on her coverlet. "Thousands," Gaul and Loyal said. Yet how much could the 2 of them have seen? Hiding on the way into the mountains, fleeing on the way back. Maybe 1,000 at most, Luke claimed. But Baron could not make himself trust the man for all the trophies he brought in. Scattered, according to the White Cloaks. How close could they have come? Armor and cloaks shining in the darkness like lanterns. There was a way to see for himself, perhaps. He had avoided the wolf dream since his last visit. The desire to hunt down this slayer rose up whenever he thought of going back, and his responsibilities lay here in Emmons Field. But now, perhaps... Sleep rolled in while he was still considering. He stood on the green, bathed by an afternoon sun low in the sky, a few white clouds drifting. There were no sheep or cattle around the tall pole where a breeze ruffled the red wolf-head banner, though a blue fly buzzed past his face. No people among the thatched houses. Small piles of dry wood atop ashes marked the White Cloaks' fires, He had rarely seen anything burning in the wolf dream, only what was ready to burn or already charred. No ravens in the sky. As he scanned for the birds, a patch of sky darkened, became a window to somewhere else. Egwene stood among a crowd of women, fear in her eyes. Slowly the women knelt around her. Nynaeve was one of them, and he believed he saw Elaine's red gold hair. That window faded and was replaced. Mat stood naked and bound, snarling. An odd spear with a black shaft had been thrust across his back behind his elbows, and a silver medallion, a fox head, hung on his chest. Mat vanished, and it was Rand. Aaron thought it was Rand. He wore rags and a rough cloak, and a bandage covered his eyes. The third window disappeared. The sky was only sky, empty except for the clouds. Aaron shivered. These wolf dream visions never seemed to have any real connection to anything he knew. Maybe here, where things could change so easily, worry over his friends became something he could see. Whatever they were, he was wasting time fretting at them. He was not surprised to find he wore a blacksmith's long leather vest and no shirt. But when he put a hand to his belt, he found the hammer, not his axe. Frowning, he concentrated on the long half-moon blade and thick spike. That was what he needed now. That was what he was now. The hammer changed slowly, as if resisting. But when the axe finally hung in the thick loop, it kept shining dangerously. Why did it fight him so? He knew what he wanted. A filled quiver appeared on his other hip, a longbow in his hand, a leather bracer on his left forearm. 3 land-blurring strides took him where the nearest Trolloc camp supposedly lay, 3 miles from the village. The last step landed him among nearly a dozen tall heaps of wood, laid on old ashes amid trampled-down barley, the logs mixed with broken chairs and table legs, and even a farmhouse door. Great black-iron cauldrons stood ready to be hung over the laid cook fires. Empty cauldrons, of course, though he knew what would be cut up into them, what would be spitted on the thick iron rods stretched over some of the fires. How many Trollocs would these fires serve? There were no tents, and the blankets scattered about, filthy and stinking of old acrid Trolloc sweat, were no real guide. Many Trollocs slept like animals, uncovered on the ground, even hollowing out a hole to lie in. In smaller steps that covered no more than 100 paces each, the land seemed only to haze. He circled Emmons Field from farm to farm, pasture to barley field to rows of tobacco, through scattered copses of trees, along cart paths and footpaths, finding more and more clusters of waiting Trolloc fires as he slowly spiraled outward. Too many. Hundreds of fires. That had to mean several thousand Trollocs. 5,000 or 10, or twice that, it would make little difference to Emmons Field if they all came at once. Farther south, the signs of Trollocs vanished. Signs of their immediate presence, at least. Few farmhouses or barns stood unburned. Scattered fields of charred stubble remained where barley or tobacco had been torched. Others had great swaths trampled through the crops. No reason for it but the joy of destruction. The people had been long gone when most of it was done. Once he lighted in the midst of large patches of ash, some charred wagon wheels, still showing hints of bright color here and there. The sight of the Tuathawan caravan's destruction pained him even more than the farmhouses. The Way of the Leaf should have a chance. Somewhere. Not here. Not letting himself look, he leaped south a mile or more. Eventually he came to Devon Ride, rows of thatch-roofed houses surrounding a green and a pond fed by a spring walled round with stone, the spillover splashing from cuts long since worn deeper than they had been made. The inn at the head of the green, the Goose and Pipe, was roofed with thatch too, yet a little larger than the Wine Spring Inn, though Devon Ride surely had even fewer visitors than Emmons Field. The village was certainly no bigger. Wagons and carts drawn close by every house spoke of farmers who had fled here with their families. Other wagons blocked the streets and the spaces between the houses, all the way around the edge of the village. The precautions were not enough to have halted even one of the assaults made on Emmons Field the last 7 days. In 3 circuits around the village, Perrin found only half a dozen Trolloc camps, enough to keep people in, pen them until Emmons Field was dealt with. Then the Trollocs could fall on Devon Ride at the Fade's leisure. Perhaps he could find a way to get word to these villagers. If they fled south, they might find some way across the White River. Even trying to cross the trackless forest of shadows below the river was better than waiting to die. The golden sun had not moved an inch. Time was different here. Running north as hard as he could, even Emmons Field passed by in a blur. Watch Hill, on its round prominence, was bordered as Devon Ride had been, with wagons and carts between the houses. A banner waved lazily in the breeze, on a tall pole in front of the white boar on the hill's crest. A red eagle flying across a field of blue. The red eagle had been the symbol of Manetheren. Perhaps Alana or Varen had told ancient stories while they were in Watch Hill. Here, too, he found only a few Trolloc camps, enough to pen the villagers. There was an easier way out from here than trying to cross the White, with its endless stretch of rapids. On northward he ran to Tarn Ferry, on the bank of the Tarndrel, which he had grown up calling the River Tarn. Tall, narrow houses built on high stone foundations to escape the Tarn's yearly flooding when the snows melted in the mountains of mist. Nearly half those foundations supported only piles of ash and charred beams in that unchanging afternoon light. There were no wagons here, no signs of any defense, and no Trolloc camps that he could find. Perhaps no people remained here. At the water's edge stood a stout wooden dock, a heavy rope drooping as it arced across the swift-flowing river. The rope ran through iron rings on a flat-decked barge, snugged against the dock. The ferry was still there, still usable. A jump took him across the river, where wheel ruts scarred the bank and household objects lay about. Chairs and stand mirrors, chests, even a few tables and a polished wardrobe with birds carved on the doors. All the things panicked people had tried to save, then abandoned to run faster. They would be spreading the word of what had happened here, what was happening in the 2 rivers. Some could have reached Baerlon by now, 100 miles or more north, and surely the farms and villages between Baerlon and the river. Word spreading. In another month it might reach Camelin, and Queen Morgase with her queen's guards and her power to raise armies. A month with luck. And as much to return once Morgase believed. Too late for Emmons Field. Maybe too late for the whole 2 rivers. Still, it hardly made sense that the Trollocs had let anyone escape. Or the Myrddraal, at any rate. Trollocs did not seem to think much beyond the moment. He would have thought destroying the ferry would have been the Fate's first task. How could they be sure there were not enough soldiers at Baerlon to come down on them? He bent to pick up a doll with a painted wooden face, and an arrow streaked through where his chest had been. Springing out of his crouch, he leaped up the bank, a blur streaking 100 paces into the woods to crouch below a tall leatherleaf. Brush and flood-toppled trees, woven with creepers, the forest floor around him. Slayer. Perrin had an arrow knocked and wondered if he had drawn it from his quiver or simply thought it there. Slayer. On the point of leaping away again, he paused. Slayer would know roughly where he was. Perrin had followed the man's blurring form easily enough. That elongated streak was clear if he were standing still. Twice now he had played the other's game and nearly lost. Let Slayer play his this time. He waited. Ravens swooped above the treetops, searching and calling. No movement to give him away, not a twitch. Only his eyes moved, studying the forest around him. A vagrant puff of air brought him a cold smell, human yet not. A he smiled. No sound save the ravens, though. His slayer stalked well, but he was not used to being hunted. What else did Slayer forget besides smells? He surely would not expect Baron to remain where he had landed. Animals ran from the hunter. Even wolves ran. A hint of movement, and for an instant a face appeared above a fallen pine some 50 paces away. The slanting light illuminated it clearly. Dark hair and blue eyes, a face all hard planes and angles, so reminiscent of Land's face, except that in that brief glimpse Slayer licked his lips twice. His forehead was creased and his eyes darted as they searched. Land would not have let his worry show if he stood alone against 1,000 Trollocs. Just an instant and the face was gone again. The ravens darted and swirled above as if they shared Slayer's anxiety, fearing to come below the treetops. Perrin waited and watched, motionless. Silence. Only the cold smell to say he was not alone with the ravens overhead. Slayer's face appeared again, peering around a thick boled oak off to his left. 30 paces. Oaks killed most of what grew close to them. Only a few mushrooms and weedy things sprouted from the leafy mulch beneath its limbs. Slowly the man emerged into the open, boots making no sound. In one motion Perrin drew and fired. The ravens screamed warning, and Slayer spun to take the broadhead shaft in his chest, but not through the heart. The man howled, clutching the arrow with both hands. Black feathers rained down as the ravens beat their wings in a frenzy. And
Hey,
Slayer
D-Man,
faded,
how you doing?
him and his cry together, growing misty, transparent, vanishing. The raven's shrieks vanished as if severed with a knife.
Good morning.
The arrow that had transfixed the man dropped to the ground. The ravens were gone too. With a second shaft half drawn, Perrin exhaled slowly, let off his tension on the bowstring. Was that how you died here? Simply fading away, gone forever? At least I finished him, he muttered, and let himself be diverted in the process. Slayer was no part of why he had come to the wolf dream. At least the wolves were safe now. The wolves, and maybe a few others. He stepped out of the dream and woke staring at the ceiling, his shirt clinging sweatily. The moon gave a little light through the windows. There were fiddles playing somewhere in the village, a wild tinker tune. They would not fight, but they had found a way to help.
I hope
by
you're doing
keeping
good
spirits
today,
up.
D-Man.
Slowly, Perrin sat up, pulling on his boots in the pale-lit dark. How to do what he had to do. It would be difficult. He had to be cunning. Only he was not sure he had ever been cunning in his life. Standing, he stamped his feet to settle them in. Suddenly, shouts outside and a fading clatter of hooves made him stride to the nearest window and throw up the sash. The companions were milling about below. "What's going on down there?" 30 faces turned up to him, and Ban Alcine yelled, "It was Lord Luke, Lord Perrin. He nearly rode down Will and Tell. I don't think he even saw them. He was all hunched over in his saddle like he was hurt, and spurring that stallion for all he was worth, Lord Perrin." Perrin tugged at his beard. Luke had certainly not been wounded earlier. Luke and Slayer? It was impossible. Dark-haired Slayer looked like Land's brother or cousin. If Luke, with his red gold hair, resembled anyone, maybe it was Rand a little. The two men could not have been more dissimilar. And yet, that cold smell. They did not smell the same, but both had an icy,
I know,
hardly
boy.
human scent. His ears picked up the sound of wagons being hauled out of the way down at the old road.
Okay, I'm getting there, boy. Calm down. My dog's over here being pushy. Alright, everyone. I'm going to call into this live for tonight. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who continues to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.